Okay, so today I wanted to take you through on how I set up my bandsaw for resawing. First thing you want to do before you work on any piece of machinery is to make sure that you are unplugged. So the first thing I'm going to do is take off my fence and open up the doors of my bandsaw. And I'm going to back everything off and take the blade off and start completely over so I can show you everything. Okay, so I've backed everything off and taken off my blade. And the first thing you're going to want to do is take off your table. It may seem like a hassle, but it's going to make everything so much easier to get set up. My bandsaw, these two knobs, I'm going to loosen them, take those knobs off, and my table will slide right up and come right off. Okay, once you have your table off, you're going to want to go ahead and put on your blade. And now, the next thing you want to do after you put on your blade is you're going to want to set your tension. How you set your tension is by tapping the side. Most bandsaws have a gauge on the back side. You can use that as a reference, but I would not use that to set the tension on your blade, just for the fact that a lot of different manufacturers of blades differ on sizes and depending on how the blade's welded, and there's a few different factors on how the blade is made that will affect the tension. So you definitely don't want to use the gauge on the back as a set point. Just use it as a reference. Okay, when you're tapping your blade, you shouldn't have any more than an 1/8 inch of play when you tap it. The next thing you're going to want to do is set your blade to the position of the wheel that you want it. Now, most people say you want the blade on the very crown or middle of your wheel, but that's not how I set it up. The way I set it up is I put the gullet, which is the innermost part of the teeth, the space in between the teeth, the furthest back is the deepest part of your gullet. You want the deepest part of the gullet in the center of your tire, which would be the highest point of the crown on the tire. The reason for that is if you look at it, when you have something flat on something that is arched or has a crown, the front and back have a tendency to wobble, and that's where you get your drift from. But if you think, if the teeth are supported and it is at the top of the crown supported, Now the front of your blade is at a standstill, and as you're cutting, the back part of your blade will go wherever the front part of your blade goes. So it'll eliminate the drift. So right here, you can see that this gullet is at the center of my wheel, at the crown of the tire. And whenever you're adjusting it, you'd never want to turn your machine on and have it rotate to find out where you want to. Just turn it by hand and it'll move to where it needs to go. If you need to adjust it, you make your adjustment, turn your wheel again by hand until you get it to where you want it. The other, I guess you could say, bandsaw myth is coplanar. From what I understand, bandsaw manufacturers and engineers have designed it to where they are not exactly coplanar for a reason. When you have your top wheel tilting back a little bit and your bottom wheel is straight, it gives it more stability when you adjust your wheels. If you have them both perfectly straight, the blade becomes unstable and wobbly, and when you make your adjustments, it'll move to the adjustment and then go back instead of staying where you want it adjusted, and it makes it that much harder to try and adjust where you want your wheel. Now, from what I understand, to prove this theory is right now I have the top wheel, the blade at the center of the wheel, as well as the bottom, and when I move my wheel to where it comes off center, you can see now it's at the front of the wheel. The bottom stays the same. Okay, so making this top wheel is not going to do anything for the bottom wheel, and it's just going to make it to where it's more difficult to adjust your blade. Now I've got the innermost part of my gullet back on center of my tire. Okay, so now we've got the tension and position of the blade. We've got the blade at the center of the tire, and we've got the proper tension. Now we're going to start setting our guides. And the first guide that I'm going to do is this back bearing. Let's see if I can turn this so you guys can see a little better. This back bearing. What you want to do is move this up just so it barely doesn't touch the blade. So when I rotate the wheel by hand, we do not want the back bearing to turn. You can see right there, it's only touching every once in a while. So I'm going to back it off just a little bit until it stops turning. I'm going to lock it down. I'm going to make sure it doesn't touch, which it just did. So I'm going to back it off just a little bit more. Lock it down. And this may take you a little while to get it adjusted, but if you get this adjustment right, you're going to have a really good cut. Okay, now we're going to want to do the same thing for the bottom. Okay. Now once you get those back bearings to where you want them, we're going to go ahead and adjust the blocks or the side guides. You may have bearings. You may have cooling blocks like I do, or the ceramic blocks. But I'll show you how to set these. Okay, so when you set your side guides, you're going to want the front of your bearing or the front of your cooling blocks to be just behind the innermost part of the gullet on your blade. You're going to want it about a 1/16 inch behind the innermost part of your gullet. So I'm going to bring these guides forward. And you should be able to see right there that we're just behind the deepest part of the gullet. Now, for your bearings or cooling blocks, you want it close but not touching. So as close as you can without touching the blade. And this one isn't as critical as the guide that's in the back, the back bearing. This side guides aren't as critical. So just kind of get it close and call it good. Just make sure that you are not touching the blade. That's the most important part. Because when you have it touching your blade, it's going to cause friction. Friction causes heat. And when these blades heat up, the teeth that are like this, whenever you heat metal up, it wants to go back to its original state, so it bring those teeth in alignment. And when that happens, it's going to try and take the easiest path through the wood, and it's going to be really wavy and out of control. So make sure you're not putting any heat on this blade. Okay. Once you've got that done, put your table back on. You are set. Okay, so I've got my table back on. One thing, if you want to check and make sure that you have your guides set up correctly, and I'm talking about guides as these back bearing guides. When you spin your wheel and it doesn't move, you can go ahead and give the slightest pressure and it should move that bearing. That's how you know you have your back guides set correctly. Now, what we're going to do is make sure that my table is level, or at a 90 degrees compared to my blade, which I have a guide down here at the bottom of my table saw, not table saw, my bandsaw. and some bandsaws come with that. But there's also another way that you can check. Now what you want to do is just take a piece of scrap wood, set your guide, what we're going to do is we're just going to make a cut, we're going to flip it over, and it should fit right behind. And this should slip right in. If it does not, then you need to adjust your table. If it does slip in, then you're at least within 5 thousandths, which is really close. So that's how I set up my bandsaw. And I haven't had a problem with drift. And I can get some pretty thin cuts. Not sure if you can see how thin that is, but thin enough for veneer or whatever you need to cut that thin for. But yeah, and it is perfectly straight, no drift. And on the fence that I built, I do not have an adjustment for drift, so yeah, I've never needed it. If I did need it, I'd just set a set screw on one of the insides here, not a problem to do it. But like I said, I haven't needed it yet. Setting it up this way so far has eliminated drift. So that's how I set up my bandsaw. Right now I'm using for resaw a 1/2 inch 3 tooth per inch thin kerf low tension blade. It's worked out real well for me so far. I do want to get some other blades just to kind of continue to test out this theory with the drift, or if it's just this blade. But like I said before, I haven't had any problem with drift. When I do get a few more blades and try it out for resaw, if I do run into drift, I'll let you guys know, and I'll have to make adjustments for the drift on my fence, but for right now I just don't need it. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hopefully this helps you guys out, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.